The recruits laughed as the old veteran struggled to march in step. Their whispers filled the air, and eyes followed every faltering move of the man who once commanded respect in the field. The sun glared down onto the parade ground, turning the polished boots of the new recruits into mirrors of their own inexperience. The veteran kept his eyes forward, trying to maintain the dignity that had taken decades to build each step. Deliberate measured even as his knees ached and his back protested. Against the relentless rhythm of the drill, he could feel the gaze of the young men on him, some curious, some mocking, some filled with that kind of cruel amusement that only inexperience can afford. The air was thick with the smell of leather and sweat, and the faint scent of gun oil lingering from yesterday's weapons inspection. The recruits shifted nervously in their uniforms, some tugging at collars that chafed, others smoothing the sharp creases of their fatigues, as if doing so would grant them an invisible shield against the veteran's presence. But the veteran ignored them, focusing only on the commands ringing out from the officer at the front, each word precise, each tone sharp, like the crack of a whip across the tense atmosphere. From the corner of his eye, the veteran could see a few of the recruits exchanging smirks, their lips twitching in barely contained laughter as they whispered among themselves, each mockery carried lightly, but stacked upon the veteran's ears like stones, placed one by one against a wall of pride that refused to break. Despite the temptation to respond, the veteran continued his march. The rhythm of his steps, an echo of battles fought long ago in places the recruits could never imagine, and certainly could not understand. Every scar on his hands, every line on his face told a story of sacrifices made and victories earned in silence and sweat, while these young men had only just begun to understand what discipline could even mean. A sudden gust of wind carried with it dust and the faint metallic scent of the nearby armory. The veteran felt it brush against his face, and for a moment he closed his eyes, inhaling deeply, remembering days when the wind had carried similar scents across battlefields, far from the clean lines of the parade ground. Each inhalation reminded him of nights spent lying in mud trenches, listening to orders barked and guns fired around him, and yet here he was, still standing still, marching and still refusing to give. The recruits even the smallest satisfaction of seeing him falter. He could hear them snickering again, a light, almost musical sound that grated against his resolve, and yet he did not break his focus. One of the younger recruits stepped too close. For comfort, trying to jostle another into laughter, the veteran caught the movement out of the corner of his eye, and for a fleeting second, his expression hardened just enough to send a shiver down the spine of anyone paying attention. The recruit froze mid-gesture, his eyes wide and uncertain, as though some instinctive understanding had whispered to him that the veteran was not a man to be trifled with. Even the others paused their laughter, momentarily sensing something in the veteran that transcended age, strength or speed, but spoke instead of a lifetime of experience that had honed him into a presence impossible to ignore. The officer in command shouted another set of commands, the words crisp and rhythmic slicing through the murmurs of the recruits, but the veteran found himself almost meditative within the rhythm. His mind wandered briefly to a time long ago when he had trained recruits himself, ones who had shown the same careless amusement, and yet over time had grown to understand the weight of discipline and respect. He thought about how he had once stood where these young men now stood, and how a few harsh lessons had taught him that laughter at the expense of another could be dangerous if unchecked. He felt a strange empathy for them, tempered with an equal measure of pride that they had chosen a path that demanded they confront their own weaknesses daily. The sun climbed higher, and the shadows on the parade ground grew shorter, but the veteran barely noticed, focusing instead on the cadence of his boots striking the concrete. Each footfall a small declaration of endurance. His uniform was hot and heavy against his skin, and sweat began to bead along his temples. Yet he remained resolute, moving, through each drill maneuver with an internal discipline that made the simplest act of marching seem heroic to those who did not yet understand the sacrifices it required. The recruits watched and whispered, still some more audacious than others, pointing and smirking, thinking they understood his frailty, yet completely unaware that each step was a testament to an inner strength, born from years of facing challenges they could only imagine in their textbooks. He remembered the smell of gunpowder that had clung to him after a training exercise that had lasted 24 hours without pause, the memory vivid enough to make his chest tighten even now. As he moved through the drill, he felt every muscle in his body remind him of its age and its limits. But he ignored them just as he had ignored them in the past when failure was not an option, and there was no room for hesitation. In his mind, he could see the ghostly outlines of soldiers he had trained and commanded, many of whom had gone on to face dangers he might never witness again. Yet each had carried forward the lessons learned from his guidance and discipline. The recruits began to notice a subtle shift in his movement, not in speed, but in certainty. A calmness had settled over him that seemed to contradict the faint tremor in his knees. They sensed it instinctively, a quiet strength that did not need to shout to be heard. It was the kind of presence that made laughter awkward and whispering pointless. The younger men who had dared to mock him before now found themselves hesitating, caught between youthful bravado and an unconscious respect for a man who had lived a life filled with challenges they had yet to encounter. The veteran did not smile, nor did he look at them directly. He continued forward, his gaze fixed on the horizon, the sun glinting off the polished brass of his buttons, a silent proclamation of a lifetime of service that demanded acknowledgement even from those too young to understand. It fully a fly buzzed near one of the recruits, and for a brief second the distraction caused a misstep. The veteran noticed it immediately, and in the most subtle way possible, shifted his posture slightly, his eyes narrowing not in anger, but in quiet observation. The recruit felt the weight of that gaze and straightened up involuntarily, sensing an unspoken authority that had little to do with rank and everything to do with experience. The laughter faded a little more, the whispers became more cautious, and a strange tension settled across the formation, as if the presence of one seasoned man could alter the atmosphere without saying a single word. Hours seemed to pass in minutes as drills continued, the veteran maintaining his composure, with every movement, his body aching and his mind alert. Each order was carried out with precision, a silent reminder to the recruits that discipline was not a matter of youth or strength alone, but of dedication and endurance. The wind shifted again, carrying with it the scent of the nearby forest. The veteran inhaled deeply and felt memories of marches through mud fields and snow-covered terrain wash over him, filling him with a quiet energy that his body desperately tried to keep up with. The recruits were beginning to tire physically and mentally, their laughter now replaced with whispers of confusion and admiration, none of them willing to voice their feelings aloud. The veteran marched on the concrete parade ground, and in his mind, he walked alongside comrades long gone through training fields and battlefields across continents and decades. He was present yet distant, carrying with him the weight of memory and the unspoken stories of those who had trusted him with their lives. Each step he took was a lesson in patience, resilience, and the quiet power that comes from surviving and enduring without complaint. The day grew hotter, shadows shorter, and the sun beat down relentlessly, yet the veteran marched on the rhythmic sound of his boots, now strangely hypnotic to the recruits who had once mocked him. The officer called commands, and the veteran followed them flawlessly, showing no signs of the struggle within, and none of the recruits dared to step out of line. Their Earlier amusement was now replaced by a tentative respect and an unspoken acknowledgement that the veteran was far beyond what they had assumed. He moved like a man carrying the weight of countless experiences, each motion deliberate, each breath controlled, as if every part of him had been forged in a furnace of discipline that no mockery could melt. By the time the sun reached its zenith, the veteran was still moving with the same resolve he had begun, with the air thick with tension and silent admiration. The recruits had stopped whispering, and their laughter was long gone, their attention now fixed on the small movements and subtle shifts in his posture. They could feel the power in his stillness, the authority in his endurance, and a creeping realization that they had misjudged him completely. The old veteran was not a relic to be mocked, but a living testament to decades of service and the kind of quiet strength that commands respect without a single word uttered. Veteran kept his head high, his eyes scanning the formation as a shadow fell over the parade ground. The sudden shift in the atmosphere was almost imperceptible. At first, a subtle tightening in the shoulders of the recruits, a barely audible intake of breath as they sensed the presence of authority approaching. From the end of the line, the sound of boots against concrete echoed differently as the general returned from an unexpected inspection. The man, whose reputation alone could silence an entire room before a word was even spoken. The veteran felt it. Before the recruits did a shift in the air, a weight that seemed to press against every chest and settle on every shoulder. He continued marching, as if nothing had changed, but his senses were heightened, each step measured and precise as he anticipated the general's approach. The recruits froze mid-step, a few still daring to glance at one another, their eyes wide and uncertain. The laughter that had bubbled moments before now replaced by a growing tension that made every whisper seem dangerous. Every one of them felt it. The shift from casual mockery to acute awareness that someone far older, far more experienced, and far more powerful than themselves had entered the space, and nothing could remain the same. The veteran felt a small pulse of satisfaction that his silent demonstration of discipline had altered the mood already. He did not need to speak to command respect. The mere fact of his presence had made the recruits reconsider every smirk, every whispered insult, and every small gesture of derision. The general walked with a slow, deliberate pace, his uniform pristine, the polished boots catching the sunlight and scattering it across the parade ground. His eyes swept over the formation like a predator examining its territory, and though he said nothing, his aura alone demanded immediate attention. Every recruit straightened instinctively, their spines rigid, their eyes forward. Some hands trembling slightly as the weight of authority settled on them like an invisible hand pressing down. The veteran noticed the change in their posture and the tension in the air, and felt a quiet pride that the lesson he had embodied was about to be reinforced by the most powerful man on the base. The veteran continued his march, each step synchronized perfectly with the beat of the commands, as if he had become an extension of the drill itself. He could feel the eyes of the general settle on him, the gaze piercing and calculating, seeming to measure decades of service in a single glance. He did not flinch, nor did he alter his rhythm, yet every movement was subtly refined, the shoulders squared, the back straighter, the gaze unwavering. A silent message that he understood the rules of the world he inhabited and had mastered them over time. The recruits felt the shift immediately, a nervous energy vibrating through the group like a low hum, threatening to burst into chaos, but held in check by the invisible gravity of the general's presence. A faint breeze stirred the edges of the veteran's uniform and carried with it the scent of dust and polished leather, the familiar smells grounding him amidst the heightened tension. He remembered inspections in the past, the same piercing gaze evaluating every detail, the same silent judgment meted out without emotion, yet capable of crushing or elevating in an instant. He felt the years of experience rise within him and knew instinctively that this was not just a routine inspection, but a test, a moment where the value of silent strength and enduring discipline would be measured against youthful arrogance and inexperience. The general stopped at the front of the line, his eyes scanning the formation before narrowing slightly as they fixed on the veteran. The recruits noticed the pause and held their breath as if the space itself had become heavy with expectation. The veteran did not look at the general directly. He maintained his forward gaze, his posture perfect, and his steps unwavering, yet every muscle in his body tensed in readiness for whatever the moment might demand. The silence stretched and every heartbeat seemed magnified. The only sound the faint rhythm of boots striking concrete and the whisper of wind across the parade ground. The general circled the veteran slowly, each step deliberate, the polished boots striking the ground with a weight that seemed to echo through the minds of the recruits. The veteran could feel the eyes on him, measuring his every movement, calculating his worth not just as a soldier, but as a symbol of experience and authority in a world that too often valued youth over knowledge. The recruits were frozen in a tableau of fear, admiration, and uncertainty, their previous laughter and mockery erased in an instant, replaced by a sense of something far greater than themselves that they could neither name nor challenge. The veteran recalled battles fought decades ago, each movement he made now echoing the discipline learned in those fields. The same lessons applied in the present as he adjusted subtly to maintain perfect alignment with the command. Despite the heat, the sweat, the aching muscles, he continued moving, flawlessly, his presence commanding a respect that the general's gaze would amplify into absolute awareness. The recruits felt it instinctively, a deep realization that they had underestimated both the veteran and the force of authority embodied by the man now circling him. The general paused behind the veteran, and for a single heartbeat the world seemed to still. The wind halted its stirring. The distant calls of the training officers faded, and every recruit felt as if the universe had condensed into this one moment of silent appraisal. The veteran stood perfectly still despite the subtle tension running through his body. Each breath controlled, each heartbeat measured. He did not flinch. He did not acknowledge the gaze, but inside he felt the weight of recognition, a silent approval that spoke volumes to anyone perceptive enough to understand it. The recruits began shifting uneasily, their previous confidence evaporating. They glanced at one another, their eyes betraying a mixture of awe, fear, and confusion. The general did not speak. He did not need to. His presence alone was enough to silence the group, and the veteran had long since mastered the art of commanding attention without raising his voice. Each subtle movement, each adjustment in stance, each tiny expression became a lesson in power discipline and the respect earned through decades of unwavering service. A distant sound of a bell clanging across the base reminded everyone of time passing, but the veteran remained, absorbed in the present, fully aware of the general's scrutiny, and fully confident in his own ability to endure it. The recruits noticed the calm control he exuded, the way he moved, despite fatigue and the heat and the relentless scrutiny it was. A quiet defiance tempered by complete understanding of the rules and limits of their world. The general walked another few paces, the boots scraping across the concrete, sounding like thunder in the minds of the young men. The veteran remembered the first time he had been inspected by a general. Long ago, the nervous tension, the sense of judgment that could never be articulated fully yet, could be felt in every fiber of his being. He recalled the lessons learned in that moment, the importance of composure, patience, and silent authority, and realized that this moment was a mirror of the past, reflected in a present that demanded the same unyielding discipline. He felt the years fall away as he embodied every principle he had learned over decades, creating a presence so commanding that the recruits no longer dared to breathe too loudly. The general stopped directly in front of him, a slow, measured step that seemed to close the distance between generations' experience and youth arrogance and humility. The veteran felt the gaze settle on him in a way that was almost physical, a weight pressing into his chest, yet not oppressive, but affirming. The silence stretched again, a tangible thing enveloping everyone present. The recruits frozen, and the veteran poised, as if time itself had slowed for the sake of this single confrontation without confrontation. The world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for a signal that had not yet come. A faint breeze stirred the pages of a nearby clipboard, in the hands of a training officer, and the sound seemed deafening. In the quiet, the veteran focused on his breathing, the rhythm of his boots against the ground, the subtle shifts in the general's posture, and the slight twitch of an eyebrow as if measuring the man in front of him against some invisible standard. He felt the tension and satisfaction merge, a deep understanding that this silent appraisal would resonate far beyond the parade ground into the hearts and minds of the recruits. And into the legacy he carried with him, the recruits shifted slightly, sensing the veteran's control over the moment, over their own fear and admiration. The general did not speak. He did not need to. The tension itself was the language and the lesson, and the veteran was fluent in it. They understood instinctively that mockery was impossible here, that laughter would be punished by shame even before a word could be spoken, that they had underestimated the power of experience and the authority of a man who had earned the right to command respect across decades of service. The veteran remembered comrades long gone, the sound of orders shouted across fields he could never return to, and yet felt present again in this moment, as if their lessons and sacrifices had condensed into his posture, into the rhythm of his steps, into the calm control he exhibited under scrutiny. He could feel their presence lending him strength, guiding him silently as the general moved on around him, each step echoing a lifetime of discipline and a legacy that refused to be mocked or diminished by youth or inexperience. By the time the general finished circling him and moved on down the line, the air had changed completely. The recruits no longer laughing, no longer whispering, but standing rigid, their eyes forward, their minds racing to understand the power and authority they had witnessed. The veteran stood still for a heartbeat longer, then continued his march perfectly aligned with every command and every expectation, the silent victory of experience now palpable in the heat of the midday sun. The general stopped at the front of the line, his gaze locking onto the veteran.